Hello, everybody. Come on in. Come on in. Glad you're here. Um, Excited to have everybody in. I see we've got a lot of folks, names that are very familiar to us here at Threaded, probably some folks who are also familiar to those who are connected to Mosaic. It's just such a pleasure to be getting in. So I'm just going to kind of do what you do as a host. You ramble just a little bit because you see that there's folks who kind of come in right at 12, those folks who have that cultural intelligence of like, you got to be on time. But then these calls bring very diverse groups. So you're going to have some folks that are like, hey, man, I was in contact with somebody else and I valued that relationship and what I was doing there so much so that I let the time flow a little bit into this and we're gonna be here. And those are my people, right? Like, and I will tell you, I don't even know if I had time to wait on my people to get in here. That'll be another. We got another couple minutes. We need to get going, but I'm glad that you guys are in here. If you don't know me, my name is Marcus Lloyd, and I get to be the executive director and founder of Threaded, which is a biblically oriented, gospel-focused racial reconciliation and justice ministry that's located primarily in the Dallas area, McKinney. We do a lot of work, but then we also do work with churches throughout the country. And you are in the exchange. This is a great opportunity, or it's a great thing that we are excited to kind of pull together in collaboration with Mosaic Global Ministries as well. Mosaic and Threaded, we've worked together in lots of different ways. Mark DeMoss, who is the leader of that group. We've worked together for several years. The Mosaic Conference, many of you went to that back in the fall. And as we started talking about, this Mosaic Conference is such a great time for leaders like you on this call that come together and you get to engage, you hear from people on the stage, you engage leaders, and then all of a sudden, like, we break for 3 years. You know what I mean? So we thought, man, how do we kind of keep some of the momentum going? How do we continue to, create opportunities for these organizations and these people who have made this relationship via the conference to continue to sustain the relationships? How do we bridge the theology that you learned at the conference and put it into practice, take it from the stage, to the streets? How do we equip leaders with practical tools to continue on in this work that we have been called to do in this ministry? How do we strengthen the national network? Like, we got to pull together. How do we strengthen that network to be really pulling this or pushing this boulder, this work that we have together up the hill? We do it together. How do we strengthen that and encourage collaboration across fields, inside geographic locations, areas of interest? And so we thought, man, let's create a space. And that is what this is. That's what the exchange is. I like to think about it as an opportunity to mine the gold that exists already in the room. Everybody in here is doing some kind of work in this multicultural creation of churches, this multicultural expression of how the church lives out in the community, dealing with the issues of the marginalized. We all are in that space. And so how do we create a space for people to learn from each other? And so that's what the exchange is. And so every month we're coming here. Sometimes I'll be hosting, sometimes Mark DeMoss will be hosting, sometimes somebody else will be hosting. But we're going to be here. We're going to have a good time, really just kind of learning together and hopefully learning from others as well. So again, if you're just getting in, my name is Marcus Lloyd, and I get to be the person who leads Threaded and organizing this call today. I just want to recognize something that's always at play when we come into this conversation. We like to believe that there are four types of people from the church that are in this conversation. We kind of call it go into the pews, and it's an acronym. Those who are passionate about reconciliation, those who are empathetic to the conversation, those who are wary about it, and those who are strivers for justice. They're in the pews, baby. And we go in a particular order. At one end of the spectrum, there are those who are just wary about this conversation. There are some who are like, this shouldn't be a conversation at a church. Like, this, particularly what we're talking about, like today, like immigration, like, shouldn't be talking about that. That's evil, whatever. Our organizations don't coincide with that, but we know that there's people. If you are not muted, by the way, go ahead and make sure you're muted so that everybody can hear. And if I don't know if Janelle, you can check around and mute people or whatnot. But anyway, so those who are wary of the conversation. Then you've got those who are empathetic to the conversation. That's probably the largest swath in most of the churches that we know and the organizations we connect with. Then there are those who are passionate about reconciliation and proximity. And then there are those who are strivers for justice. So today, you're going to hear lingo from probably the strivers for justice and the passion about reconciliation. That's the lingo that's probably going to come out today. So if you are empathetic, You may hear language in the strivers for justice that may make you just a little uncomfortable. If you are wary, you're going to probably be uncomfortable just right off the top. Just need you to know that and be ready for it, right? If you are a striver for justice, you may hear language that feels quote unquote backwards for you. Like, we shouldn't be talking about reconciliation. We should be talking about justice. You're all going to hear it, right? We need all, we need most of those on the spectrum, if you will, to be able to do this work that we're doing. And so that's what we're going to have a conversation about. So I'm excited that we're here and that we're doing that. Let me give you a lay of the land of just kind of what we are going to be looking at. First of all, the values that we have as we're talking about this, you're going to hear confessional conversations. You're going to have opportunity to extend grace. You're going to hear that. You're also going to see compassionate contending for the voice of those who are in the room and who are not in the room. And ultimately, you're going to hear a kingdom-oriented approach. We are centering Christ in the midst of this. We believe that the church can and should have this conversation, that we got all the tools in the scripture. We can come across that. We can do that together, right? And so you're going to do that. If this call is usually, it's something that if you are a leader of an organization or church, it'll be very helpful for you. If you are not, it'll be helpful to know what to engage your leaders with, perhaps. And there's still some tools you can engage with that will be for individuals as well. Let me see if I got everything in. I think I got it in. So let me give you the lay of the land. We are going to do I'm going to introduce the panelists that we got here. We're going to do a discussion. We'll have some Q&A. During what I would say is, while we're doing the discussion, if you've got questions, put it in the chat. Our fantastic executive assistant, Janelle Colligan, and also Kylie Batoka, they'll be pulling questions and sending them to me so I can ask them, but just put them in the chat and we'll grab them. I promise we will. And then we're going to do a breakout time where you can kind of learn and engage with other leaders for just a few minutes and pray for one another in a sense, that too. And then we'll come back. We'll do a little bit of discussion from a large group. And then we're going to give you some really cool next steps based on the stuff that we're presenting here today. So that's what that looks like today. Fantastic. I'm excited to have everybody in. Let me tell you who we've got here as far as panelists are concerned, because these are some friends of mine. I'm really excited to have them. First off is somebody who has taught me in lots of ways, mentored me in certain ways, and has just been a legendary organizer kind of in this work. And that is my friend, Alexia Salvatierra. We've got several books that are engaging with this, faith-rooted organizing, mobilizing the church in service to the world, co-authoring these. I know she's always like, I co-authored these, Marcus, don't make it my own. I get it. Yes, all co-authored. Buried Seeds is another one, learning from the vibrant resilience of marginalized Christian communities, and then also God's Resistance, mobilizing faith to defend immigrants. So you can see why she's here. So glad. And she is a professor at Fuller Theological Seminary. And so she's been my professor a couple occasions. And so excited to have you here, Alexia. Thanks for being here. We also have one of my oldest friends in the world. I've known since we were in elementary school. And who knew that we would be doing this together at all? And that is my friend Alice Kay. She is an amazing, very active lawyer in this immigration work. She's been doing this for years, had her own immigration firm for a long time, has had lots of things going on. And so she's partnered with others now, so she can kind of let them do the organizing work, if you will, of organization, so she can just do the law stuff. And she's fantastic, great friend of mine for so many years, and she's been on the color commentary show that we have. And so, Alice, thanks for being in here. We're glad you're here. And then we've got Stephen Reeves. Stephen and I have been building friendship over the last couple of years, doing some great work. He has also been, I think he was a lawyer for a while. Still, I guess he's like a Marine, I guess, like once a lawyer, always a lawyer. I don't know if that's continuing now or not, but definitely has some ways in which he's engaging. But he leads FaithWorks, organization that does a lot of work helping churches and organizations really think about what the Bible has to say and what the church's response should be, and not only immigration, but injustice as well. Works a lot on the southern border and partners with organizations and churches down there, helps churches get engaged with that. So look, you got some heavy hitters here today. Okay, I just want you to know, if you came to try to figure out what the church should be doing, you are in the right place. So let's jump right in and get going on it. And remember, if you got questions as you hear it, put it in the chat. We'll do it, and we can bring that to Q&A later. So let's start out. Alexia, I want to start with you just to get us started. You got people here who are church leaders. What should church leaders be paying closer attention to right now, today, when it comes to the immigration concerns that are out there?
So I think that unless you're in touch in an intimate, ongoing way with immigrant churches, that there's a lot that you may not know about what's going on. And so I want to give you just a little mini snapshot. I'm not only a professor at Fuller, I'm the academic dean of the Centro Latino, which is our 50-year-old Spanish-speaking theological education program. So we had a student deported about a month ago. She'd been in the country 32 years. She'd worked for her denomination for over 20 years. She has grown children that are citizens and grandchildren that are citizens. She had completed her MDiv with us, and she was in the last quarter of her Doctor of Ministry program. And the weekend that she was deported, the Homeland Security was representative was being interviewed by the LA Times, and she said, "The Golden State should thank us. We're getting rid of the worst of the worst." The student that I just mentioned is the best of the best. Now, this is not an unusual story. She's not an aberration or an exception. I teach in Spanish every Tuesday and Thursday night, different groups, about 26 pastors each, all over the country. And I also go around and I speak. And I was speaking in Dallas, of all places, to a bunch, about 30 pastors from the all over the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I had the same experience in these classes. And there, as I said to people when we first started the class, do any of you know somebody personally who's been detained or deported? And everyone raised their hand in the group of pastors in Dallas, everyone in both of my classes. So if you're not up close and personal with these churches, you may not know the breadth of what's happening. And you may not know that it's not that the rhetoric is that criminals are being targeted, but that's not the truth.
Hmm. No, I
I
appreciate it.
do want to say one more little thing, which is
Yeah.
that immigrant churches, I don't just want to give you the bad news of what you may not know. The good news of what you may not know is that immigrant churches are also on the front line of accompanying people and doing an amazing job.
Hmm. No, I appreciate that. I think what I hear with that is we have brothers and sisters in Christ who are leading churches who are having to deal with this on a frontline mode here. Not only that they see it in their churches, but they themselves are probably feeling this possibility that at any moment they or people that they love would be away. And that should concern us as people who are brothers and sisters in Christ with these folks who are there. So that's a great way for people, I think, to think about that right now. Alice, I know that obviously you're frontlining from a legal standpoint. Do you see any concerns that the church leaders should be paying close attention right now to that you can help?
Yeah, I kind of echo what Alexia was saying, which is, it's not what you're necessarily seeing on the news, right? I'm sure those of us that are doing this work could tell you stories, firsthand stories, um, that would give you examples where, it's not all criminals and the worst of the worst. These are our neighbors, our friends, our personal churchgoers. So really, when it comes to church leaders, I think what our church leaders need to be mindful of is that for a lot of the church, immigration has previously just been maybe a non-issue, something that didn't touch their lives, something that wasn't relevant to them and their story. And I think that what's happening right now is expanding the knowledge and concern level, whether it's based on misinformation or not, people care. And when people care, they really need to be hearing from our faith leaders. What does the Bible say? What does Jesus say? We need some guidance based on biblical truths to help us formulate our opinions and direct our actions. But really, this is just immigration is not a non-issue for the American church anymore, and everybody really needs to be mindful that people care.
Man, I think that's a big concern for me is that it seems like at some level the church thinks that this is something over here on the side that's not going to affect us, that doesn't mean anything to us. And so that to me is concerning in and of itself. And I would say probably to back out or to connect to that is what's always hard right now in this conversation is we say we need biblical guidance, but the problem is that there's biblical guidance that's coming out that doesn't seem to match I think the meta narrative of what God is asking for the people of God. It's plucking verses out and using them out of context, but it still comes out as biblical guidance. So it's hard to even know, yes, the church is giving biblical guidance, but it's not always really fully biblical, if you will. So that's definitely a concern for me. Stephen, you're working at a different level than the other two here. Like, what do you think are some concerns that we got to know about right now?
Well, I echo a lot of what they said. I think I want to just hone in on one thing that, these are not folks who have committed violent crimes. And in so many cases, these are folks who have been following the exact letter of the law for so long. They've been showing up to every appointment. They have work authorization. They're asylum seekers. They have done it the right way. And yet, suddenly, the next time they show up for an ICE appointment after, only having not been to one in a year or 6 months, something like that, suddenly they're just picked up. And so it is. The other thing I want to stress is being close to some of these churches and communities through our work at FaithWorks. I don't think you can overstate the amount of fear
Mm,
that is in these communities. And I think there has long been folks who are of different mixed statuses in their families who have concerns, but and had to be careful. But the current tactics and way this administration in particular is going about enforcement is meant to cause fear, and it's working. And so it's very hard. It's just hard to overstate how inundated I think these communities are in fear, from the ones that I've talked to, and how that there's just so many repercussions when that's the case.
mm. And what I hate to hear, right, is that obviously there's this the if I'll say it like this: if you are a criminal, like the fear makes sense, right? Like you did something wrong. So if you're sitting in fear, then I'd be like, look, you did something wrong. Like that's appropriate. But what I hear you saying, and what everybody's kind of saying is over and over again, is that there's these folks that ultimately have not done anything wrong, if you will, and they're sitting in fear because the law doesn't seem to work in that way. That seems to be lawful. And I think one of the concerns that go with that, if I can put that together with you guys too, is that there's ways in which I hear Christian communities sort of supporting some of the work and continuing to use the dehumanization language of marking people as criminals as an excuse, not only to deport them, but to treat them a certain way. And I will say, even if they are criminals, if you will, there is still human decency that must be maintained. And so you're going to hear from us on this call, like we are very much like law is important, government is important. God instituted that through the scriptures. We see it, and so Christians should be able to support that. But there's also a point that Christians are called to when we see law that's using power to dehumanize and tear down those who are made in the image of God. That's also a place that we should be stepping up in. And so that's what you're going to hear a little bit about today. But sometimes getting involved in that is a little difficult. We don't know exactly how to start. So, Dr. Alexia, if you don't mind, what foundations need to be laid before a church moves into advocacy or action in this place?
So I have so much to say. I'm gonna try to make it short and we'll see what we can do.
Okay.
So I just want to go back to your characterization at the very beginning that there are different groups. I think you said three, and actually I have three in mind also that you need to be ready to speak to,
Mm,
or to respond to. One group are people who are deeply concerned right now. They're confused, they're anguished, and they're concerned. And they want to know. They want to know what the Bible says. They want to know more about the actual situation. Then you have a group of people that I would think of as the rich young ruler. They want to do what's right, but they're also very scared of loss. They're very scared that the truths that you might tell them might get them in trouble
mm,
in a variety of different ways. And then there's another group, and I think of that group as the older son in the prodigal son story, that they feel like immigrants, particularly illegal immigrants, are taking advantage unfairly, and that other people are being indulgent of them. And so, out of a mixture of self-interest and righteousness, they are angry. So, you're talking to all three of those. So, how do you talk to all three of those? Well, first of all, um, it's it is important to know much more about what's actually going on. We have a very complicated immigration system. There's a little book called Welcoming the Stranger that actually comes out of the National Association of Evangelicals through World Relief. It's a very useful grounding book. And this is how our immigration system works and doesn't work. These are some of the basic scriptures on immigration. There are scriptures on immigration that say a variety of things, but there really are a preponderance of scriptures that talk about the call to hospitality, 92 of them. But beyond that, there are some key theological themes that are important to talk about that are not about immigration, but really are at the core of our faith. And that has to do with what does it mean to be the body of Christ and the family of God. It has to do with what is the relationship between law and grace? What does it mean that we've all been forgiven and we need to forgive? What does it mean to love your enemies? These are really core theological themes that we have to make sure to preach on and to teach on. But when you're dealing with those two other groups that I mentioned, that's not enough. Because it's not, if you're frightened of loss or if you're angry at being taken advantage of and outraged, the information is not going to be able to be received. What changes people are in those places? Relationship. That I would say to you as a church leader, how do you create opportunities for real relationship between immigrant and non-immigrant believers? And wherever possible, not relationships of charity, but relationships of joint mission, because that's where people begin to build trust and to share stories. And that's what's really transforming. I have a doctoral student who's a Southern Baptist, white Southern Baptist pastor, and who just finished this massive, his doctoral research was looking at people in Southern Baptist churches in the South, white folks who welcomed and why they welcomed, like what made the difference. And there's a lot in the study, and I'm not going to try to give you all of it, but relationship was core. That they knew people personally, and that they were like, this ain't right. This ain't right. So I do think that once you create those relationships, you do need to be able to answer the hard questions. So it is very important to know things like how Jesus dealt with law, to know about the cities of refuge, which I don't have time to describe, but it's Numbers 35. Go back and look into it. To know how the scripture speaks to some of the complexities and what kind of objective answers there are to some of the complex questions people have. But until you get to a rational place, and people in those two other situations are not in a rational place, until you get to a rational place, you're not going to get there. Last thing I want to say is just what the father said to the older son. That this is what happens when you build relationship, is what the father said to the older son. The older son said to the father, "This son of yours." And then he proceeded to list all the son's violations. The father didn't say, "Oh, he didn't do those things." The father said, "This brother of yours, your brother." That the shift that happens in relationship is from the other to your brother.
Mm.
That's what has to happen in order to have a useful conversation.
Mm. See, I've always loved that, Alexia, as we talked. I think there's a constant, drum you're beating around this. Like if you're in proximity to people and you have a relationship, your next step is really easy. You know exactly what to do when your people and you're in proximity with are hurting. You do what you do with the family if your family was getting hurt, right? So I've always thought that was a really great thing. And Stephen, I know that you do work and engage with churches as well, and so I'm curious, like, we talked about some of the foundations and things. What are some of the best work that you're seeing from churches right now in the midst of this conversation in your space?
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. We've got cohorts of churches that are figuring out their role right now. Some of them have been long into immigration ministries, direct service, compassion work. Some have been more on the kind of justice and advocacy side, but helping those churches learn from one another. And that proximity is so very important. And so we're seeing churches that are going grocery shopping and dropping sacks of groceries on the doorsteps of folks who are too afraid to go out. We're seeing churches that are starting just immigrant support groups, that this fear and this trauma and the loss of friends and neighbors and family members They need one another. We're seeing some have set up hospitality houses, just incredible ministries of long-term support and shelter. Another church that we were working with has opened its facilities to immigrant serving ministries and nonprofits. Just when you got a church with a lot of space, Monday through Friday, especially, be a place where people can you host other organizations that serve them. There are there's a lot of good ministry going on in the midst of this fear, in the midst of the need, and I think you know. What the churches and the people I've talked to in Minneapolis, for example, the type of work that's going on there just to support people in their everyday has been really incredible. But I think what's important is for churches wherever you are right now to start the relationships. If you feel a sense of call to want to help, find the nonprofits, the ministries, the churches that are already in the immigrant community and serving the immigrant community, and build relationships now, so that when and if something like what happened in Minneapolis comes to your city, that's not the time to start. The time to start was way before that, and so the proximity and the relationship and the trust is so necessary that you've kind of got to start now and find the places where people are already serving and get to know them.
No, I love that. I think we tend to respond to crisis, but we don't do the hard work prepping for it before. So then when it hits, we're not ready. And we said it when we would deal with churches throughout the last 10 years of our work. We would tell them, hey, every 4 years, your church is prepped for a complete destruction and divide, right? These elections are doing that. So what are you doing in between to be prepared for that, right? And so that's where that preparation comes. But there's also a question, like, if I'm thinking about it, like, okay, here's some stuff I can do. But I don't know, Alice, this may be a question for you, right? Like, are there things churches should not be doing in the midst of this that are very unhelpful, whether that you're seeing from a legal standpoint or whatever? Like, what do you think?
So, well, I kind of prepared to say what churches should be doing. So when you ask me what they should not be doing,
But to
a
take the
little bit of the
opposite of whatever you
opposite.
said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for the church, we've got to educate ourselves. Pastors, a lot of times they have this amazing theological education and experience, right? They're not immigration lawyers. So you don't know what you don't know, right? I mean, I'm not a theologian, I'm not a doctoral student. So there's a lot of things that I don't know and have to look to others to help, when I'm researching. So, when it comes to our pastors, just thinking that or that you understand is going to be a big mistake. There's so many misconceptions out there, a lot of misinformation. I still have pastors that call me like, "Oh, well, he's married to a citizen, so he's totally fine," and this misconception that automatically means that everything is okay. People, you don't know what you don't know. So you've got to educate yourself. You've got to educate your staff. Have somebody come in and just do a base, like, dispelling myths of immigration. So give you a base of knowledge. Focus on how you talk. Focus on your language. Use humanizing language versus dehumanizing language. We're not going to refer to people as illegal. A person isn't illegal, right? And just the small change in terminology is helpful. But, focusing on doing things versus just thinking that it's not an issue for your church. Designate private spaces in your church. Speak up, don't be silent, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's really good, and I think one of the things that I heard that's, I think, an overarching piece that is so prevalent in the space right now is, don't believe that you know what's going on, right? Like, don't believe. I would say, don't believe you got it, because people are like, all right, I got it. No, you don't got it. Don't believe that, because you don't. This thing changes every day, right? Like, we can't, like, get connected to some kind of organization that is on the front lines of this, that is watching all of this maneuver, and let them guide you in what's actually happening. Don't believe you do it. I think the church gets in that. We're like, we believe that through our lens, we can look at society and go, oh, I think I know what's going on. No, no, no. You need outsiders that don't have your algorithm and your, your lens and your cultural lens and all that stuff. You need people who are in the work doing it. So don't run and do it. And I'll say something else because I know I see Colin Packer in here and something, right? We've talked about this before. It's like there are orgs right now. There's stuff going on at the field office down in where we are in Dallas that the organizers are like, please do not come down here and get engaged with this if you have not gone through any training. Right. I know you feel good in your heart. Oh, I just want to be down there. Right. But you're going to bring potentially a lot of saviorism and paternalism that you have not identified in yourself yet. That's the stuff, the preparation that needs to go on, or you may come and do more damage. So get with an organization that knows what they're talking about and let them lead you. Don't try to do it on your own. So that's just my little thing. I just went off on it. So let me go to Stephen on this. And actually, I'll let you start, Stephen, but I know Alice will feel pretty excited about this question too, right? So you can speak to it however much you want. Obviously, there's legal boundaries, right? Legal stuff that's going on. And I know you have a law background. You're probably experiencing that in this the work you're doing on the border. So we have these boundaries and opportunities from a legal standpoint when caring for the undocumented or the vulnerable. Like what should pastors understand about these boundaries and opportunities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the first things, I'll say two things and maybe this pass it to Alice. But the first thing is that it's not a binary. It's not illegal versus legal. There's a lot of different types. There's work authorizations, there's asylum seekers, there's refugees. It's way more complex than you think. And so don't think this person's illegal or undocumented, this person's not. There's a lot more than that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is honestly, what is legal and the rights that people have seems to be changing currently. You could give a clear know your rights type lecture to folks, and those rights may in fact be violated right now. So it is more challenging now to say what is legal for the government to do and what your rights are than it was not long ago. And that's two things. I think maybe I'll stop and let Alice jump in, but it's a complex system and it changes all the time.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I know, Alex, you tell me that all the time when we talk. So as you think about this question, like, what are some of the boundaries and opportunities that we need to be understanding when we're caring for these folks?
Yeah, Steven's totally right. Like there's a wide spectrum that people don't really understand, and there's a lot of complexities, and everybody's situation is different. And, I think it's important that our pastors remain focused on the love and the empathy towards serving their congregants versus giving legal advice. I have a lot of really well-meaning pastors
Mm,
that contact me regularly saying, "Oh, well, I told her to do this." And I'm like, "Oh, but that's not what I would say to do."
mm.
And it's coming from a place of love. So as pastors, connect with local immigration advocates. Have somebody that you can call or refer to when you need to. Someone who knows the law and is staying on touch with this. Find somebody who focuses on immigration law, not somebody who does it on the side. Or, hey, they're a corporate lawyer, but they have a friend that's immigration. Like, find somebody who is really living this world because things are changing every day. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years. What we're experiencing right now as an immigration practitioner is is so far beyond different. Doesn't even live in the same realm of my past 20 years of immigration practice. What's happening right now is different, fundamentally different to the core. And so, having people get actual legal advice is going to be so important. And so, churches will also ask me, well, hey, I'm worried I don't want to get my church in trouble. So how can I walk this line? You know, a lot of churches have things like a benevolence fund. If you just feel really strongly about wanting to connect somebody, and you want to offer, you can offer a benevolence to someone. Or, you know, another big issue that pastors ask me is, well, if I designate this space as private space, does that then put me at risk of harboring? And the answer is no. So these are legal questions that I think our pastors are wrestling with. And these are great questions. And I'm encouraged when I hear pastors reach out to me. But I would just encourage you to actually ask a lawyer to guide you on those things, so that you can make the best choices for your congregants as well as your church.
You know what, Alice, I'm going to stay with you just for a second on this, right? Because you mentioned something that I think is really important and probably, I know, hit me in a space of like, if I'm a church leader, I'm going to ask it in two ways, right? I know I gave you a question, if you will, that's one, but I'm curious too. Are there policies and practices that churches should be aware of in protecting immigrants and engaging? You mentioned like, hey, this private space, this designated space, and what does that mean? So, are there some things that they should be aware of that does put the church at harm, or maybe puts the immigrant at harm? So that kind of question. And while you're doing it, just maybe you can start even understanding like what is designated space in the midst of that, right? So that you got a lot there. Go for it.
Sorry, I'll try to narrow it down. I know I'm trying to be respectful because I know your other panelists are like
You do.
super smart,
I
and I
know. We're
want to
getting.
hear from them too.
I know. Get it. We'll pull it. We'll pull it in. Trust me. We got you.
Um, so when it comes to designating private places, what I'm referring to there is, one of the things that this administration did is lifted a policy to where previously there were certain types of spaces where our government would not enforce immigration policy. Places like churches and schools and things like that. That's never been a law. It was a policy, and that policy has been lifted, which allows for immigration enforcement at those previously respected places. Um, and so, churches were asking, okay, well, if ICE can come onto my campus, should I do? And it's important to note that if you have a church, generally the general American or the general public can come onto your campus, right? You want the general public to come to your campus and go to attend your services. So a lot of the space on your campus is going to be public and open to the public, which means anybody Joe Blow off the street can walk in, and that includes law enforcement. However, there are probably spaces on your campus that are considered private spaces, like offices or backstage or places in a nursery or children's areas that require background checks. And so, something that a church could do is, think through, hey, where are places that we actually restrict certain people can go there? And once you have restrictions as a church, whether you need an ID badge or permission or a background check or whatever, you can designate clearly by posting a sign that says this is a private space on our campus. And what that does is it clearly lets law enforcement know is, hey, if you want to come beyond this space, you need a warrant. Not just an immigration arrest warrant. You need a judicially signed warrant by a judge that gives you specific permission to go into this private location looking for this particular thing. And so, that's kind of what I'm talking about as far as designating spaces on your campus is making it clear what's public space, what's private space. Um, but I think that was really what you asked me, right?
Definitely
You asked me
designated.
something else,
Yeah, yeah. I
but
was thinking
I don't want to ramble.
what you said that was really interesting, right? Because there's a sense in which you're saying, hey, this is something you can do to protect immigrants at your space that has a legal thing. And so I think the question there was a sense of kind of, is there are there other policies that churches should have in place to protect their immigrants of their church as they come in and from the community? So I don't know if you have any additional things other than the designated space, but just curious.
No, I think the only other thing you asked me was, is there things that you can't do? And the only thing that I would just tag on to my other comment was, you can't post a sign that says private space and then expect it to legally be enforced unless there's actually a reasonable expectation that that is a private space. So churches can't do certain things to try to get around the law, but we can do certain things to let law enforcement know we know what the law is, and we are going to stand by and make you do your job if you want to enforce the law on our campus.
No, I love that. And I think, again, those legal pieces are continual, and I'm sure we have resources and things that we're going to be giving you at the end of this. If you have questions and things like that, we can go even deeper in. And so let me switch a little bit to it, because I know that there's a way in which we're even talking about this like it's expected, or that it's something that people should do and whatever. And so, Alexia, you obviously have been very well known historically in the ways in which you have engaged in movements, faithful movements, if you will, in word terms of faith-rooted organizing and civil rights and justice. So, can you give some examples from church history, even where believers engaged in this faithful community organizing or stood in solidarity with the vulnerable, and what might we replicate from that today?
Thank you. I think that's a perfect segue, actually, Marcus,
Oh,
because
thank you.
I
I
was saying
appreciate
that
that.
part of what we also have to be prepared for is that they may not respect the law,
Mm.
that is what we're seeing in a number of places. And then you really have to, you have to have a fallback of understanding, how do we minister when our government is breaking the law, right? So I want to tell a couple stories. First, I'm going to take you back to 1980, which is a long time ago now.
Easy, easy.
But and I have to give you a little bit of background on asylum law just to understand the story.
Sure.
So in 1951, the United States was a leader in pulling countries together to create the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which also contained the first international agreements around what we do with refugees. Because during World War II, we had the highest percentage of people who were displaced at that point than in any earlier point in history. In 1980, the United States codified that with the Refugee Act of 1980. So there was actually a protocol for how we determine whether someone is a refugee, right? The problem is that shortly after that, they began applying that protocol differently for people that were running from a country where they were facing violent persecution. If they were running from that country and that country was our opponent, like Russia or Cuba, it was very easy for them to make that standard. Of course, you have to understand that when you're running for your life, you don't always have the opportunity to collect all the documentation you need. So that's something that they recognized. They made that very, very easy if you were coming from a country that was our opponent. If you were coming from a country that was our ally, it was a very different story. The law was not being applied equally. And so we had people flooding from the civil wars in Central America, and they were having to face standards that made it almost impossible for them to get asylum, even when we had detailed reports from Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch of massacres. And so they were coming from those massacres. We had the reports, but they weren't being taken seriously. So, Tucson, Arizona, John Fife is a local Presbyterian pastor. He looks like Clint Eastwood. He's 6'2" cowboy. And he's driving by the detention center, and he looks up, and there's a sheet hanging from the barbed wire, and written in blood on the sheet is, in Spanish, is "Help us for the love of God." So he stops and he swings in and he bullies his way in, and he talks to the Central Americans who are there. And he says, "Well, we're going to help you. We're going to find you a good lawyer. We're going to get you out." This is crazy because they're telling him these horror stories. And so he gets them out, and then he finds out that the system is rigged. That even though they're brothers and sisters, they're Christians, and they're fleeing persecution, that he can't get them help. So he brings a bunch of churches together, and they decide to take seriously Numbers 35. So Numbers 35 says that if you've committed a crime, but if the response to that crime is cruel and unusual punishment. In the case of Numbers 35, the crime was manslaughter, and the punishment was that it was being treated as if it was murder. So a life for a life. That what God says is that the people of God have to create these places of refuge where someone can stay and be protected until they can get a fair hearing. So people use Numbers 35 in Nazi Germany to protect Jews. They used it during the time of slavery to protect runaway slaves. So when John Fife and the other churches in Tucson got together, they said it's a Numbers 35 situation. We're going to invite these people to stay with us. We're going to stand on our religious liberty to provide hospitality. And we're not going to hide that we're doing that. We're going to be direct that we're doing that. And they called the movement Sanctuary. So I was a member of the second church in the country to declare sanctuary. It was actually in California, a Lutheran church. But we, in the end, had 500 churches across the country who declared sanctuary in the name of Numbers 35. It was a gray area legally. As it turned out, a number of people were indicted, but only one person was convicted. And one person did prison time, and she was convicted for transporting, that she had transported somebody across the state line in the service of trying to help them get to a safe place. The sanctuary movement was part of a larger movement, but is widely credited with being critical to the success of the larger movement. So we changed the asylum system to make sure the application was fair. We sparked off temporary protected status, which was a way of recognizing that in certain places in the world, there's a human rights crisis that is at a level that we should let people come and then work out whether they deserved individual refugee status, right? That's temporary protected status. It's existed for a number of different places. It's temporary. If the human rights crisis calms down, then it ends. Right now, there's only one group in the United States that has temporary protected status, and that's white people from South Africa, and it's new. It's newly granted to them. Nobody else has it, even though the places that people have had it from are by and large still active human rights crises. But we did win temporary protected status through the sanctuary movement. It took 10 years. And we also stopped the funding to the governments that was supporting the civil wars. The Reagan administration had said that if we stopped the funding, we were pouring money in, that if we stopped the funding, all these countries would go communist, and none of them did. But the wars ended. And so the crisis ended. So we were instrumental in the sanctuary movement in doing that. But we were taking risks. I am not suggesting now that churches do sanctuary in that way, because they will just come in and get the people, right? It's not, that strategy doesn't make sense right now. But I do just want to tell you the story to say that when churches, that part of why we were able to win is because the general public believed what the government was saying, believed that these were communists, believed that they were violent infiltrators, and believed that they didn't deserve asylum. And through our faithful witness, well, through the courage, let me underline that, through the courage of the refugees themselves and their faith, who were willing to stand up and tell their stories, regardless of their danger, and through the witness of the people who believed them and stood with them and stood for them, we were able to change the hearts and minds of the public. And so that was our role. And it was a culture change that led to a legislative change that saved millions of lives. So I just wanted to tell that story. I have a more recent story from the Evangelical Immigration story table, but I think that's good enough for now. You can hear any of my stories if you want to.
No, yeah, I sit at the tiny feet of you to hear those occasionally. I'm interested in, and maybe this can speak, anybody can speak to this, Alice or Stephen as well. Like, we've got things that worked in the past, and you mentioned, just kind of aside, like, this doesn't work now, right? Are there other things that worked in the past that doesn't work now, or can be done a little bit better? And let me just remind people, if they got questions, put them in the chat. We're entering into kind of question and answer, and I'm bringing some of the questions in. So anything you're seeing that worked before that doesn't work now, in addition to what Dr. Alexia mentioned. Stephen, looks like you came off. So.
Yeah, I think a few things come to mind immediately around the legal and tactical changes. I mean, there's been a report in the last few weeks that ICE agents have been told they do not need a judicial warrant to enter someone's home. That's different. Staying inside your house and not opening the door used to be advice people gave, and now they might bust down the door. And whether that's legal or not, we don't know, but that's what they've been told they can do. Um, and I think, you think about folks, just the way and the manner in which ICE agents are going about this, whether you're a citizen or not, should matter, but it doesn't matter sometimes if you get thrown in detention. I mean, eventually, but people are getting grabbed and at least detained for long periods of time before citizenship is determined. And so, again, there's probably a lot of things that enter that category of what used to work no longer works. But I will say, when it comes to what we were speaking about, whether it's sanctuary and the secure locations that Alice was talking about, a lot of people of faith are fighting back and fought back immediately when the new administration revoked what was called the sensitive locations memo, which said they wouldn't enter churches, schools, or hospitals. A whole lot of Christians and other people of faith sued them immediately. There are at least 3 and maybe 4 lawsuits challenging the legality of that. And we are FaithWorks is part of the second one. The Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, who I used to work with, is part of the first one. They have an injunction that you can put a sign on your church door and say, because of this injunction, you cannot enter. So whenever there are these moments, litigation is always part of a strategy. And so people of faith have stepped up to challenge the legality of that. And I think it's important to say that the legal basis of this is not necessarily actually about the immigrants themselves. It's about the right of um, free exercise of religion of churches who want to serve their neighbors regardless of their status. So if the government is taking actions that scare people away from coming to your church, that's a religious liberty problem,
Interesting.
and that's the basis of which these lawsuits have been filed.
Wow, that's really interesting. Doc, let me, I know, Doc, it looked like you were coming in. I know there's a question. Well, go ahead and say what you were going to say, Alexia, and then I'll go
Right.
to the question.
Well, I want to go back to Gandhi for a minute. That Gandhi said that what creates change is non-compliance with evil. And that when enough people decide that they are not complying with evil, that evil can't win. My experience, I mean, I was in the Philippines under a dictator. I was a missionary in the Philippines under Ferdinand Marcos. I saw the nonviolent victory that deposed the dictatorship personally. 1 million people ran over the tanks. That had its roots in the base Christian community movement. So that was the spine of the movement. When Christians decide that enough is enough nonviolently, and that we are going to stand with people, and that we are going to speak up for people, and that we're going to pray for people fervently, that is in the long run what actually creates change. The forms of it, I think we are in shock right now because we are used to having a rule of law in this country that actually, from my perspective, just doesn't exist. It doesn't matter. I have a close friend who is part of a national group of Christian lawyers, and she said, we're crying lately. We just look at each other in shock. It's like we can bring lawsuits and we should, right? We can document going after them and we should, but the bottom line is that they're doing whatever they want to. It's impunity. And so, well, I lived there before. I lived under a dictatorship. I know what that's like. It didn't stop the church. It didn't stop the church. But we are very used to relying on the rule of law, relying on the democratic system that is being eroded as we speak. But certainly there are people in this country. I was very close to people who were civil rights leaders who talked to me about times and places where that didn't exist for certain groups of people. And still you had to stand up and you had to unite, and you had to be fearless, and you had to suffer with those who suffer. And so I think that's what the church needs to get beyond the shock in this country and to say, no, it's time to be the church without any guarantees of protection.
Mm.
That doesn't mean we'd be suicidal. The early church differentiated between suicide and martyrdom. They weren't the same thing. We don't want to do things that are suicidal, but we do need to do what the Lord is calling us to do and to be a witness, a very clear witness that, we are not going to stand by when our neighbors' core rights are being violated.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that's going to look different in different places and for different churches. It's not a one size fits all, but it does. I want to go back to what Marcus said earlier and what I heard Alice saying and Stephen saying, which is get involved in a network. This is not a DIY thing, but just, and know that maybe your whole congregation can't, but make opportunities for those who can to be engaged and do educate yourself and do make opportunities for people to educate each other.
Yeah. No, I love that. Alice, I know you were coming in. I saw you nodding along with a lot of what's going on. Let me pull one of these questions real quick from a legal standpoint that you can answer that, and then you can add anything you want there, because we got my friend Tammy asking about a question in the chat saying, they have 30 to 40 Spanish speakers who meet in the Bible study each week. They meet in part of the building that is open to the public. They do, however, have some space for staff that has key access. If this group saw ICE coming into the building, could they move that group into this key access place of the building in order to try to keep them from being detained? What do you have to say from a legal standpoint on that?
The church is the one who designates what's public space and what's private space. If the church gives consent for particular people to enter a particular place, the church has the authority to do that. If the church gives consent for this group to maybe meet behind one of those key access spaces, let's just say it's a group that, hey, this is the list of our attendees, and these are the people we're going to allow into our space. That would be a wise idea to maybe plan that meeting. It's going to be behind closed doors because that is a meeting by invitation with the consent of the church. That might be a good idea or something that you could do in situations like that. But I kind of wanted to add on to what Stephen and Alexia were saying, and really what your question was also about, what can we be doing, what has worked and what hasn't worked. And I'll be honest with you, and I know I've personally talked to you about this. There's a lot of doom and gloom, and I didn't want to come in today as Debbie Downer. So I tried really, really hard to think of something positive that I could say. And really, I wanted to give two tangible examples of positive things that the church has done in this administration with immigration. And it was really hard. So
So find a story.
But I have two things, okay? And both of them directly relate to the church mobilizing. And one of the first example is, the church, Trump has these crazy travel bans and these visa bans from like, hey, if you're born in this country, if you're a citizen of this country, you are screwed from all immigration. And, we're not going to look at you. We're not going to look at your application. We don't care about anything. It's just this black and white. This is where you're from. And initially, when that started, there were no exceptions to that rule. And if you saw, there were a lot of Americans that adopt internationally. And we had people who had adopted children internationally, and there was no exception for their child to come to the United States. And so you had children who were legally adopted by United States citizens just sitting in orphanages across the world. And because of these arbitrary travel bans, they were stuck. And so the church mobilized and was able to really get onto the representatives, get onto this administration. And they have now made it public. The Department of State has now said, hey, we're going to carve out this exception. So that's one win. And we'll take it where we can get it, right? And then there's a second example, and that is for pastors. I do a lot of work with religious organizations, and there's a particular type of visa for religious workers. And there's this crazy backlog that happened a couple of years ago based on a change in policy. And the rule is, without getting into the details, basically pastors could be here for 5 years, then they had to leave the country and wait outside the United States for a whole year before they could come back. And so our congregations were really impacted by not allowing the continuity of our church leaders. And that is something that just within the past couple of months, the Department of State has changed a rule on. And that's because of the church mobilizing and the church using its voice. And so, while yes, there's a lot of doom and gloom, it's really, really rough right now. I do want to be encouraging and say it's possible. Like we can come together. There is hope in the Lord, right? We are doing his work. And so if we stay together, if we mobilize, if we do these things in love, the church has power and we can make a difference, even with Trump.
And I just want to add to that that I really believe in our capacity to reach legislators who are Christians on the grounds of our common faith. I've seen it over and over again that we really need to disciple our leaders. You don't need to go meet with your congressperson to push a policy. There are no policies right now. Oh, I love, Alice, your examples. I never would have thought of those thinking. But by and large, there are very few policies we can win right now, but we can build a relationship of ministry and discipleship where we help perfect love to overcome fear, where we help faith to overcome fear, where we help people to do with what in their hearts they believe to be right, even though they're frightened. That's encouragement is a really core role of the church always. We need to encourage our leaders. So we need to build relationship with them so that we can do that. And that prepares us for when there is something that we can win.
Yeah, I think that's really good, and I love that whether you guys are kind of maneuvering through the conversation. One of the things that Threaded has built is a tool called Resilience Roundtables, and it's really created for moments like this where people in church are sitting going, "What should we do? How do we engage this?" And it takes you through a framework where you talk about the things that you're concerned about, right? Which we've done a little bit of. You talk about the places where you can be curious about trying to understand what's going on in different parts to get it, but also a way to be compassionate in the conversation and compassionate even to those who are maybe bringing a different idea into the room. And then lastly, like we also need to figure out ways to celebrate. So this is how resilience is built in these ways. And so we'll put something in the chat if you need that material to kind of take and do some small groups of your churches. We got a few here that have gone through that. But what I want to do right now is I actually want to put you into just some short time for a breakout, just to be able to go through a couple of questions. We want, again, to mine the gold of the room, to be able to have people engage a little bit with each other. And so there's going to be 3 questions that we're going to put in the chat for you as we break into groups. Janelle's going to do that. And first is like, what's weighing on you most right now as it relates to the current immigration landscape? 2, where might God be inviting you or your church or organization to grow in this current season? And then you'll see it in the chat there. Where have you seen solidarity embodied well, either in your context or beyond it? So again, you'll have about 15 minutes in here. So I don't know how many people are going to be in it, but be cognizant of the time and storytelling, right? Like let's make sure that we're able to kind of get through, because what I really want to see you guys do as well in that last 2 to 3 minutes is to pray for one another. To lift up the concerns that you shared, and encourage one another in the growth that's needed, right? So try to lead that time frame in there as well. So we got the questions in the chat. If you want to copy that, because sometimes we head into a breakout, sometimes the questions don't go with you. So if you want to get in there and copy that for yourself while I'm kind of stretching here, that way you'll have it in case we need to know. So we're going to push you into this chat. You got about 15 minutes, so we'll go to 1:20. We'll do that. So you'll actually have 16, and then we'll come back for a little discussion and give you resources to take with you to the next one. Okay, we'll see you in a few.